Hello friends and welcome back to another video. My name is Julie if you're new here, and I love to read books. You probably all know it, there are books that you just see everywhere. On booktube, in stores, on goodreads and on bestseller lists, and sometimes you just still don't want to read them even though everybody seems to love them. And today I want to tell you about the books that I will personally never read even though they are super popular. And I will also tell you the reasons for that, because they are quite different for each book. The first book that I will probably never read in my entire life is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And same goes for his book The Martian. And I did not choose these books because I think Andy Weir is a bad writer or anything. I actually think he's probably a great writer. Because one of my friends recommended me both of these books and she loves them wholeheartedly. And she actually has an awesome taste in books and authors. But I just really can't stand any sci-fi novel or book that takes place in space. I mean, stuff like Star Trek is fine, because mostly they are inside of the spaceship and they are in a group and it's more about the characters and their connection to each other. But if, like in those two books, the main character is in space alone, no, I don't want to read it. Especially not if he has to leave the spaceship or if there isn't like enough food or water left or anything like that and he has to find a way out of the situation. That is just a horrible idea to me and I don't want to read about it. And Andy Weir really has a thing for this trope. Both of these books actually feature a character that is alone in space and possibly dying. So, not for me. The whole being asleep, losing your memory and waking up alone in a spaceship is probably one of the worst scenarios that I could imagine. It's just terrible. And that doesn't just go for books, it's also for films, like Interstellar, for example. And I know that this is a very niche thing to avoid, but I guess the more books you read and the more time you spend figuring out what you actually enjoy in books, the more you also realize what kind of tropes you don't like, and this is a big no for me, even though these books are probably very well written. The next book really is a classic. It's on so many lists that I have seen of 100 books that you need to read in life and lists featuring the greatest books of all time, and I don't want to read it. It's Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. This book probably is one of the most popular books of all time. It also had a very successful movie adaptation that I actually watched as a teenager, so I know the story, but I will definitely not read that book. First of all, as I've said, I already saw the movie, so I know the story and I don't really see the point in reading the book after watching the movie. It just really doesn't make sense in my head, at least in most cases. And especially if I didn't enjoy the plot in the movie and it's not that different from the book, then why should I read it? But apart from that, the real reason why I won't be reading this book is that I believe this book should be way more controversial than it actually is. I read a lot of reviews of this book before I decided that I won't be reading it, and I found so much stuff that I really haven't heard anybody talk about, no matter if they're talking about the book or the film adaptation, and it's also not mentioned in any of these lists, obviously. For example, what I hadn't really considered before was that it is an American author that is writing about Japanese culture, and he's actually including a lot of cliches from what I've gathered in the reviews, and he's even imitating typical Japanese writing, and that just doesn't sit right with me. I can't really speak of that because I haven't read the book myself, but it does not sound enjoyable to me. Especially from the parts that were quoted in the reviews. This just made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, to be honest. One review on Goodreads, for example, by Liz Lynch, actually says, "There's a way in which the book, written by a man and a Westerner, is slightly fetishistic, but less so than you might imagine. And even though it says like the less so than you might imagine part, that just really makes me want to skip the book. There are also questions about the authenticity and accuracy of the book's contents. But what is even more questionable than that is the research that the author did do. Because he did have someone that he could ask and quote about the life as a geisha, and that woman, Mineko Iwasaki, actually sued the author after the release of this book. Because he did mention her in the acknowledgement and they had an agreement that she would remain private. So she sued him for breach of confidentiality and the case got settled outside of court. So she was paid some kind of compensation for that. But still she was seen as like a traitor and it was seen as a violation of the code of the geisha that she had talked to him about her life, and that is just not a good way to handle the situation, and I don't know why he did that. I don't think you can really fully understand the situation because, as I've said, it was settled outside of court. But anyway, it's just a weird thing that has happened, and yeah. I think the only positive thing that you can see in that is that he at least talked to people who are actually from this community. But that was also part of why I don't want to read this book ever. Next up we have a book that is so popular on booktube, BookTok. I've seen it on Instagram and all over Goodreads as well. It's also fairly new in comparison to the others I have talked about, and it is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And the reason why I would not read that book is that I know if I read it, it would just cause me to spiral and I would be so caught up in my own head that it just wouldn't be good for me. This book deals with themes of depression and very dark thoughts, obviously. And while I don't struggle with depression myself, I think that reading about it, even if it seems to be done in an inspirational way, would make me think about things that are not healthy for me to obsess over, and so it's just dangerous territory and I don't want to try to get into it. The book is also centered around the idea of a library of regrets, where you can choose to go a different way in your own life story every time you open a new book. So you can choose a new path that you would take, a new decision that you would make, and that way you could possibly get rid of some of the regrets you have. And I luckily don't have many regrets in life, which is why I don't think I would be able to connect to the main character really well. As that's a really big part of the book, I don't think I would enjoy it as much. I also don't usually enjoy fictional books that are very obvious and theoretical and trying to bring across a certain message. This is quite hard to explain because every fictional book kind of does this, but in books like this one there isn't really a metaphor used, and the reader kind of gets the message served to them on a plate, if you understand what I mean. So there's just this different layer of abstraction that is missing for me. I personally prefer books that are more open to interpretation. I really don't want to sound too harsh with this because I haven't read the book, so I can't tell if that really is the case here. And it's not a bad thing in general, it's just something that I personally don't enjoy in books as much. And the fourth book that I will never ever read is The Subtle Art of Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. So I'm not usually a big fan of self-help books, but sometimes I do read them. And when I saw this one trending on social media, I was kind of intrigued. I mean, the title is very catchy and the cover is also very bold, so it definitely catches your attention. And the concept seemed interesting enough. But as I usually do, I looked up reviews before picking it up. And these reviews convinced me very quickly that I should not read this. If you ever want a good laugh, try reading some of the 1 and 2 star reviews on Goodreads. It's hilarious. I think a good summary of what the general gist of the reviews that I read and that made me want to skip this book is this one review by Cherry, and she wrote, "Definitely written by and for straight, white and entitled males. I have no f***s to give for this book or the author." And that is, yeah, I think it says it all. Some people have said that there are some parts of the books that are quite sexist, and there are other books out there that describe this that are much better at doing so. And also that the general takeaway of this book is just that you should basically just choose which issues and problems you give your attention to, because you have only so much mental capacity or emotional capacity to distribute to different topics, and that's the takeaway. And yeah, I don't think I need to read a whole book about this, and that's why I won't read it. The last book on my list of books that I will probably never read is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. First of all, I love John Green, and I have said before, I adore his writing style. It really speaks to me. I have enjoyed so many of his books, and actually, I think I would enjoy this book if I read it, but I also know that it would definitely take me on an emotional roller coaster and I would bawl my eyes out. And I just don't like being sad. I have read my fair share of books that kind of deal with the same topic, especially in the early 2010s. Stuff like this was really popular and a lot of books like this came out, but I haven't really seen anything like that come out in the last 10 years or so. At least not as many and not as popular as these were. But maybe that's also just because I don't really read YA books anymore. But the books that I read back then, back in the day when I was a teenager, were, for example, My Sister's Keeper, or Before I Die was also one that I read. So many more, but these all were kind of the same, dealt with the same topic. And back then I loved them. But back then I also liked being sad. I mean, I was a teenager and I spent a lot of time on Tumblr, so that was kind of part of my whole identity. But I'm over it now, have been since a few years. And I just want to be happy and read happy books. Which doesn't mean that I don't want to read any sad or hard-hitting books ever again, but I just want to choose more carefully how I want to affect my own emotions with my reading. And that's why I will skip this one. Maybe one day, but I honestly don't think so. So these were the 5 popular books that I will probably never read. But as Justin Bieber famously said, never say never. And maybe I will change my mind about these. Do you have any books that everyone seems to love but you don't want to pick up? Then let me know in the comments and I will see you in my next video. Bye!